Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council Audit and Governance Committee. I am John Beesley, the Chairman, and before we go any further, I will ask the Democratic Services Officer to read out the housekeeping notice regarding how this Skype meeting will be managed.
Good evening, everybody. It's Bob Hanton here from Democratic Services. Just read out the standard set of housekeeping notices. Please note that the meeting of the committee is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. To ensure the meeting is managed effectively, please could everybody present follow these ground rules for speaking. Only speak when invited to by the chairman. State your name before you speak, if you have not been introduced by name beforehand. Some people may have needed to dial into the meeting and will therefore not have had the benefit of visual. Please mute your microphone when you are not speaking. If you would like to speak, please type RTS, request to speak, in the instant message conversation panel on the left-hand side of your screen and click the arrow button to send. But please note that this panel is visible to all parties. If you are able to, it may also be helpful to indicate the particular issue you wish to speak on. This will help to maintain the flow of the meeting. If there are any recommendations moved that require a formal vote, these will be carried out by myself, the Democratic Services Officer, asking for a response of for or against or abstain from each member of the committee. Finally, please do ensure that background noise is kept to a minimum as far as possible and that mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Hanton. I think it might be helpful to those either streaming in or watching this later if I just run through the names of those people who are participating in the meeting. It was suggested that each might like to introduce themselves, but I think given the number of officers I would need to explain, that would take probably too long. So for the purposes of the meeting, the members of the Audit and Governance Committee are 9 in total. There is myself, John Beesley, the Chairman, Councillor Lawrence Williams, the Vice Chairman, and then Councillors Marcus Andrews, Councillor Mike Brooke, Councillor Daniel Butt, Councillor Mike Cox, Councillor Beverley Dunlop, Councillor Simon McCormack, and Councillor Mike White. And I think we're joined by Councillor Vicky Slade as the leader of the council, but as the portfolio holder for Audit and Governance, and Councillor David Brown, Resources Portfolio Holder. I would like to welcome Daniel Butt to his first meeting as a member of Audit and Governance in this session. He was previously on Audit and Governance. Welcome back, Daniel. Good to have you with us again. And I'd also like to welcome former member of Audit and Governance, Councillor Stephen Bartlett, who is joining us this evening, I think specifically for the item on BH Live. So you're very welcome to the meeting as well, Stephen. And then amongst the officers we have present are Graham Farrant, the Chief Executive, Julian Osgathorpe, Corporate Director, Bill Cotton, Corporate Director, Dan Povey, Assistant Chief Financial Officer, Nicola Webb, Assistant Chief Financial Officer, Nigel Stannard, the Head of Audit and Management Assurance, Fiona Manton, the Risk and Insurance Manager, Sian Balaghall, Deputy Monitoring Officer, Richard Jones, Head of Democratic Services, Matthew Filmer, the Finance Manager for Corporate Services, Anthony Rogers, Head of Leisure, and Bob Hanton, who we just heard from, the Senior Democratic Services Officer for Audit and Governance Committee. In addition to that, of course, I mustn't forget Mrs. Tompkins from Democratic Services, and I'd like to thank her for all the help she's given me, along with the other officers, for setting up the preparation for this evening's meeting. And the other two people who we will be hearing from, but right at the end of the agenda, are our external auditors from Grant Thornton, Paul Dossett and Sam Harding. I don't think I've missed anybody out, but if I have, could you just make yourself known, please? No, that sounds good. The meeting this evening, as we all know, has got a very long agenda, and there are a couple of items on it which may take us a little bit of time to go through. And so therefore, I would like to try and keep us to time on all the other items. Normally we try and conclude an audit and governance meeting in 2 hours. I don't think that's likely to be possible this evening. And obviously, if the meeting does go on longer than expected, if it's appropriate, I'll call a short adjournment for a break, but we'll have to wait and see. Certainly not before we've done 2 hours. But if we are going to be going on perhaps a little longer, then if members can bear with me, and I will do my best to accommodate a break at the appropriate time. So moving on to the agenda, could I go back to Democratic Services for item 1, apologies?
The Chairman, there's no apologies for the meeting tonight, and therefore there's no substitute members appointed.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Hanton. So that's item 2 taken care of. Item 3 is the election of chair for the 2020-21 municipal year. Could I ask for nominations, please?
Can I nominate Councillor Beesley for chair?
That's Councillor Andrews.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to propose Councillor Mike Cox as chairman, please. I believe I have a seconder.
Councillor Mike Brooke.
I'm happy to second that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brooke.
And I'm happy to second Councillor John Beesley. It's Mike White here.
Thank you very much. I think that was proposed by Councillor Beverley Dunlop. Are there any other nominations? Given that it's now a contested ballot, I will revert to Democratic Services because the ballot needs to be conducted by them.
Chris? Yeah.
Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the nomination. I'm willing to let my name go forward as chair on the clear understanding that in the event of my being elected as my first act would be to invite Councillor Beesley to be vice chair, but to effectively be the co-chair of the committee with me, sharing the responsibilities and allowances accordingly, a sort of job share. I was appalled that there is nothing in our constitution to allow this, and I would consider it a priority that this be formalised as soon as possible. The ability to job share is vital to certain sections of our society, such as those in a caring role, often minorities and those with disabilities. If it takes a couple of old white blokes to sort it out, so be it. To the credit of last year's chair, the Audit and Governance Committee has, I believe, been an example of how an overview and scrutiny committee should be, namely open, transparent and non-political. From my perspective, I stand in sharp contrast to some other BCP committees, and so I would like to drive this example forward. As many of you know, I'm a qualified chartered accountant and auditor for 35 years, and in business on my own account for over 20 of these. In addition, I have chaired various audit and governance committees for at least the last 16 of the last 20 years. Councillor Beesley has a wealth of experience and is clearly an able chairman. However, he has a reputation, unfortunately, which few of us would wish for, and which potentially harms the reputation of BCP. When we review items such as BH Live, which previous councillors in senior positions were instrumental in setting up, we need a chairman with no axe to grind and no history to protect. Some people have cautioned me against this proposal, being a co-chair with John. But I prefer to make my own mind up, and I have seen no evidence today which dissuades me from it. The benefits of BCP from having co-chair of the Audit and Governance Committee would be significant, and it would show people within and outside BCP that we can work together for the greater good. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cox. Could I ask Democratic Services to take us offline and conduct the ballot, please?
Chairman, just before we do that, can I say just for the public record that as we've had the two nominations, the meeting will not be broadcast while the secret ballot takes place, and a holding screen will be placed on the live stream. When the vote is complete, I will announce the result once the meeting is live again. In accordance with the Constitution, if there is an equality of votes, the chairman or the person presiding will have a second or casting vote. Thank you very much, committee. We'll now go offline for the secret ballot.
have the result of the election of chairman for the Audit and Governance Committee for 2020-21. The total number of votes cast for Councillor Beesley is 5. The total number of votes for Councillor Cox is 4. Councillor Beesley is therefore elected chairman of the Audit and Governance Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Thank you, members. I will do my best to work hard for audit and governance with all members of the committee over the coming year. I think we've got a very large agenda to get through over the next 12 months. I'd like to pay tribute to Councillor Cox, my commiserations to him, but I will do my very best to be as inclusive as possible, as I always have done in the past, and I hope that we can work together as a team on the committee for the better of Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council. Thank you all very much. Moving on now to item 4 on the agenda, which is the election of Vice Chair for the 2020-21 municipal year. Could I seek nominations? Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to propose Councillor Cox as Vice Chair. Councillor Mike Cox, please. Thank you. So can I have a seconder again?
And I've asked to speak, so I'm happy to second Councillor Cox for Vice Chair.
That's Councillor Brooke.
Councillor Brooke.
Thank you. Councillor Dunlop.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to propose Councillor Lawrence Williams, please, for the position of Vice Chair. I would like a second for that, please.
Yeah, Councillor Mike White here. I'm happy to second that.
Are there any other nominations? No. Well, in that case, I will revert back to Democratic Services and ask them to conduct a ballot. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman, I have the results of the election of Vice Chairman of Audit and Governance Committee for 2020-21. The results are Councillor Cox, 4 votes, Councillor Williams, 5 votes. Therefore declare that Councillor Williams is elected Vice Chairman of the committee.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Jones, and thank you to the officers for conducting both ballots. It seems to have been fairly straightforward for most of the time. Thank you. Congratulations to Councillor Williams on his engagement as Vice Chairman again for the coming year. My commiserations to Councillor Cox as the runner-up. Could we now move on, please, to item 5 on the agenda, declarations of interest. If committee members have any declarations of interest, please could they indicate by typing RTS in the instant messaging conversation panel, and I will then ask them in turn to declare. So I think the first one there is Councillor Andrews.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I haven't indicated to speak.
Sorry, your name has come up, so I must have got that in the wrong order then. I
believe it's Councillor Cox and Councillor Butt, Chairman.
Yes, Councillor Butt is the next one on there, yes.
It's an unrelated matter. It's for Richard Jones. My computer, so apologies, is wanting to restart in 12 minutes, and I will be out of the meeting. I don't know why. I can't stop it. Richard, can you help? Sorry.
Sorry, members. Councillor Butt, I don't think there's anything we can do to actually stop that at this late hour.
Okay. If I drop out of the meeting, it's because the laptop is automatically restarting itself. It's not me.
Councillor Butt, you can dial in. So in the email, there's a phone number and a PIN number. You could call in on the telephone, or one of the team may be able to give you a call.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Could I just ask Councillor Butt, if it restarts and you can get back online, could you just send a message in the sidebar to indicate that you are back and that all is well? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So reverting to item 5, declarations of interest. I haven't had any other indications, so I assume that there are none.
No, you did. I did an RTS.
I'm sorry, I thought that was your previous one. I apologise. Councillor Cox.
I'd just like to declare that I'm a registered auditor and have my own firm of auditors, so I think that should be declared.
Thank you very much. It's been noted. If there are no others, then moving on to item 6, which is confirmation of the minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of March. Having gone through them, I can't see any action points in there. Are you all content that there's a true and accurate record of the meeting that took place back in March, and that I can sign them as such? Probably easiest if I ask, is there anybody who does not agree with that? No, in that case, I'll take it that those minutes are agreed. Item 7, public issues. No public issues have been received for this meeting, which takes us on now to item 8 on the agenda, which is the review of BH Live contractual and governance arrangements. I've just got a couple of comments to make by way of introduction, and then I'm going to ask Sian Banagol to explain further to her email last night the remit that we have as a committee, narrowly focused on the governance issues and the governance issues alone around BH Live. But I'll ask her to do it in a formal way once I've just made a couple of comments. I suppose in a way I'm perhaps picking up from those made by Councillor Mike Cox before the election of chairman, just by way of saying that although I was very closely involved with the previous Bournemouth Council administration in setting up BH Live, I obviously have a history of involvement which ceased at the end of March 2020. 19. I've purposely taken advice on whether or not I have any interest in this item, and Anne Brown, the Interim Service Director, Interim Monitoring Officer, has written back to me and confirmed that she is not aware of any suggestion or any connection between myself and BH Live at all, let alone one which will constitute a local or pecuniary interest, nor does she consider my previous involvement as leader of Bournemouth Council would per se constitute bias in this matter, which would prevent me from carrying on with my role. She is not with us this evening, but I thought it was important that I had that in writing, lest anybody thought that there was any conflict. And as I say, my involvement with BH Live ceased at the end of March last year, and I've had no involvement until this item since then, and I hope that members can understand that, as with so many things, the change has been fundamental with BCP Council in absorbing all the previous council's work, and I think anything that has happened will be brought out in the course of this item with us this evening. So could I ask Sian Banagal if she could just quickly run through the legal aspects of our remit this evening?
Thank you, Chair. The email which was circulated yesterday was intended to draw everyone's attention to the fact that the remit of Audit and Governance Committee today was to consider the contractual and governance arrangements rather than other matters which may have been considered not in public session by other committees of the Council. I just want to add to that in drawing everyone's attention to the provisions set out in the Constitution's meeting procedure rules, which require members not to disclose any part or content of any agenda, report or other document marked confidential or not for publication, unless and until the document has been made available to the public. To that end, should any members wish to discuss anything which is perhaps outside the narrower remit of today's agenda, I would encourage members to move this meeting out of public session as permitted by the Access to Information procedure.
Thank you very much indeed, Ms Banagal. Could I just ask members before we start on this item, does anybody have a particular issue they'd like to raise around legal services at this stage? Councillor Cox.
Yes, I'd like to take the advice of Sian Banagal and ask for this to be put into private session, because I believe that no matter how hard we try, those of us who have listened into the private sessions of other committees will automatically, may well inadvertently give evidence away as to other items which shouldn't be public at the moment.
Ms Banagal, would you like to answer, please?
Of course. If it is the decision of committee that it is impossible to discuss the matters before committee today in this report without risking straying into any other agenda report or matter before another committee which is confidential or not for publication, then I would advise that it would be sensible to use the right to go into private session if members feel that it would be impossible to have the conversation today without taking that precautionary step.
So is your advice that the way forward is to proceed with the verbal presentation that is planned from the Director, that we deal with issues which certainly shouldn't be in private session, and then if there is a necessity, we would have to take a move to go into private session as a result? Provided that the present,
pardon me,
I think the public get to see and to hear the work of audit and governance as far as that is legally possible. so therefore they should see and hear the first part of that meeting.
Absolutely. The part of the presentation that has been published as part of the agenda pack can, of course, be heard in public session.
Thank you. So does that answer you satisfactorily, Councillor Cox?
Yes, that's fine, absolutely.
Thank you very much. We've had confirmation that Councillor Butt is now back online. Welcome back, Councillor Butt. Councillor Dunlop.
No, I think that's fine now. It's been resolved that we should go ahead with the presentation in open session. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. So if I could now invite Mr. Cotton, Corporate Director, to present the report. Mr. Cotton.
Thank you, Chairman. Hopefully members have had a chance to read through the report, so I'll just keep my comments fairly brief. But just to remind us all that we're here to obviously talk about the contractual and governance arrangements between BCP Council and BH Live. BH Live was set up originally in 2010 under the legacy, the former council, Bournemouth Council. And it had an arrangement to run a contract for 25 years to run a series of leisure and cultural facilities in Bournemouth. Primarily the BIC, the Bournemouth International Centre, the Pavilion Theatre, and 3 leisure centres, the Little Downs, Stokeswood and Pelhams. It actually also runs 3 other local leisure centres, and has subsequently won some contracts in Portsmouth, Croydon and London. In terms of the organisation, it's important to note, I think, that it is a separate organisation to the council. It's not wholly or partly owned by the council. It's a separate company and registered charity. As I said, we have a 25-year legal agreement, 10 years in and another 15 years to run. And basically, the agreement works on the basis that we as the council, we are the landlord. We own the buildings, we own the facilities, and have those landlord responsibilities in terms of major repairs and so on. In return for utilising those facilities, BH Live pay a contract or service fee to the council, and there are provisions in that contract for that service fee to rise in line with RPI and also with efficiencies that are sought over time as well. In terms of the setup, as I said, it's a trust. There are actually 4 councillors involved in BH Live, 2 on the main board and 2 on a subsidiary company. And I think that's really one of the key issues I'd like to hone in on my report. In point 13 of my report there, it talks about sometimes there's a sense that councillors who are on that trust board may be potentially be in conflict when they're acting there as trustees. They're acting there to protect BH Live, but they also have their wider council responsibilities and so on. And sometimes those things don't always sit together very comfortably. So I think one area I would suggest the committee examines and perhaps wants to debate is how we support those councillors, and if indeed whether those councillors maybe best not to be there or be there under a different role. In terms of managing the contractor from an operational perspective, there are quarterly meetings between the chief executive of the organisation and senior officers and relevant portfolio holder, and I think we are now getting into the state of with a new chief executive from BH Live and things bedding down within the officer structure in the first year. We're now getting into a round of establishing those meetings. I think I'll probably leave it there, if I may, Chairman, just to look at finish on looking at the recommendations in the report. As I said, perhaps the council can have greater clarity over the role and expectations of councillors who are members of BH Live. That we bring BH Live and similar organisations back to overview and scrutiny on a regular basis. We have a measures put in place to agree an open book accounting process so that we are confident that they have financial stability and are able to fulfil their contractual obligations. And that we review our contract management arrangements and make sure that they're fit for purpose. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Cotton. Is the presentation just from you, or are there any other officers who are augmenting that?
I'm hoping Anthony Rogers, head of leisure, is on the call. I know he was busy visiting his newborn baby and wife in hospital, so he's dashing back to a screen. If he's here to help me answer any questions that come forward.
Thank you very much indeed. So we'll go to questions. Remember, please, that our remit is not as wide as that of the Overview and Scrutiny, nor of course the Cabinet. It is expected that we will concentrate on the governance issues, and if we can make sure also that we don't say anything that we have had confidentially at this part of the debate. Councillor White.
Thank you, Chairman. We're asked to consider the role of councillors on this committee. I'm not hearing any officer guidance, and I would appreciate some input from, for example, the monitoring officer on what might or might not be appropriate in this situation, and what are the issues we ought to be considering. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor White. Ms. Ballingal, would you like to respond to Councillor White, please? I've also had an RTS from the Chief Executive. Perhaps I should ask him to go first in case he was proposing to answer. Mr. Parent.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I was proposing to answer. It's just that this is an issue which we've picked up centrally, and to be honest, was going to be a task to be undertaken over the next few weeks or so to get some guidance out to councillors on their roles when they're performing as a nominee of the council on an external board, whether it be a limited company or a trust or a limited liability partnership, etc. I think that has been slightly delayed, and I suspect it's going to have to wait for the arrival of a permanent monitoring officer to give us the capacity to prepare that guidance. But we certainly intend to provide some more detailed guidance to members on their role and the way that they handle potential conflicts, etc. In all of those positions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Farrington.
Perhaps I could come back, Chairman, and say that if we don't have that guidance, perhaps we should wait for that and consider this particular point at a further meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor White. I certainly agree with the Chief Executive in what he said. I think the Council have responsibilities to those members who sit on external boards and panels. And I believe also that in their role as directors under the Companies Act, they really ought to have proper and thorough training in those roles, which perhaps is best undertaken by the company on whose board they are sitting. But nevertheless, I think there is a gap in there which needs to be filled. And I think perhaps we need to leave the officers to go and conduct the work Mr. Farrington has suggested. And I think, as you say, Councillor White, come back and review what has been proposed once that has been done. No, Mr. Farrington, how soon would you think that could be done? How prioritised would you make it?
To be honest, Chairman, I wanted it done this summer. I'm just, I was hoping that Anne Brown would be able to do it. I think members may know she's undergoing hospital treatment at the moment. So if she comes back to us quickly and we've got the capacity, then we'll do that. If, you know, we will look to see how quickly we can. I think it's quite important. I'm also just seeking out from the Local Government Association whether they have any existing guidance and advice, but I've not had a response on that when I've asked the question. So I will follow that up as well. So it has to be a priority. I certainly want to get it in place this calendar year. I would have hoped to have got it in place this summer, to be honest, because we have a number of external nominations.
Well, I expect we're all pleased to hear the priority you're giving that and the urgency you're attaching to it. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Councillor Dunlop.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to ask where this idea of a conflict might have popped up. And the reason I ask the question is, as you know, Chairman, as a portfolio holder that sort of kicked off this whole process that resulted in us creating BH Live, whereby we moved our leisure and events activities into this subsidiary, and then subsequently I'd sat on that trading board for, well, many years, I think probably 10 years at least, and it was very clear what our roles were. When you sit on that subsidiary, you are there looking to do the best for BH Live, particularly sitting on the trading subsidiary. It has a very clear purpose. You have very clear roles about what you're there to do, and I'm just curious as to where this conflict might have cropped up, because the overall ambition, and it may well be since BCP was created, the overall ambition of a councillor that sits on that board and sits on the trading board in particular is to fulfil that role within BH Live.
Thank you for that. Does anybody want to respond, or do we take that as read?
If I can, Chairman, just if I can try and be helpful. I think to answer Councillor Dunlop's point, you're right. In many ways, it's a sort of a theoretical risk. However, you know, there is the potential for perhaps an unease of feeling of conflict of interest, potentially between if the council, for example, was undertaking a financial negotiation with BH Live, wanting to get more value out of what they were doing, or proposing that they do different services that BH Live felt were uneconomic or similar. So, you know, there could be instances where there was an unease in terms of the different responsibilities.
Thank you, Mr. Cotton. Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to wholeheartedly back up what Councillor Beverley Dunlop was querying, because I see no conflict of interest here at all. As far as I'm concerned, BH Live, although it's not legally a subsidiary, effectively it is a subsidiary. You know, we don't own it legally, but we control it by virtue of a 25-year contract. There has been such a thing as a persons of significant control, which has to be registered. Now, I've not looked that up on BH Live, but I suspect that person of significant control is actually BCP Council, because we do control that company. And I would be absolutely appalled if councillors were not allowed to sit on the board and have some influence. If there is clearly a conflict of interest, then you declare that conflict and you leave the meeting. But to try and reduce the role of councillors in this way, I think is utterly wrong.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. I actually concur with Councillor Dunlop as well, and Councillor Cox. I was on the board, as you know, you put me there, for some years before resigning to become mayor, and then back again afterwards. But during the time I was on the board, I had exactly the same feeling. And we went to the away days. We were treated as board members, not insulated from the council, and we were part of the organisation. I actually resigned because I had a conflict of interest when I became portfolio holder for tourism, and otherwise I'd still be on there until we changed to BCP. So I can't see an issue either.
Thank you very much, Vice Chairman. Your voice is very muffled on the speaker this evening. Others have commented. Is there any reason you can think of? Because the clarity just wasn't there, I'm afraid.
No, I can't. It could be I've got a sore throat.
All right. Well, thank you. Councillor Bartlett, just before you speak, it was you who brought this to me when you were a member of Audit and Governance and said that, and this is going back to the very start of this calendar year, and I immediately agreed that we should get it to Audit and Governance at the earliest opportunity. I'm sorry it's taken so long. You know the reasons why, but you do have a very special interest attached to getting us to Audit and Governance, and I value the fact that you're here tonight. Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. There are a whole raft of reasons why I raised BH Live and the relationship with the council. I won't go into them in detail, but I just wanted to pick up on the immediate point that's under discussion, and that's the one of conflict of interest. where we're told that there isn't a conflict of interest. But I'd just like to tell you that because of a potential conflict of interest, the chair of the trust actually would not allow the council members of the trust to attend a board meeting fairly recently because he recognised the conflict of interest that the councillors may have. So immediately there's evidence there, irrefutable evidence, that there is on occasion a conflict of interest.
Thank you very much. I take it you have other issues you'll want to raise, Councillor Bartlett. Do you want to do any of them now?
Yes, I could do, but what I would like to say is that it is very difficult to not go into some areas of the contract and I think that Mr. Cotton has already done that actually, because the contract between BH Live and the council is actually a confidential document, and he's already outlined some of the issues contained within it. And there are one or two areas where I think that we possibly could be touching on the content of that confidential document. And I think there are issues that they are of governance and they are about the relationship between BH Live and the council. But I think undoubtedly it will touch on one or two of the issues surrounding the contract, which I think is best discussed below the line. So, Mr. Chair, I'll leave it for you to decide whether you want to move to do that. But what I could do, I suppose, is just give you the headings of the areas that I thought would be appropriate to explore this evening, if you're happy for me to do that.
I'm perfectly happy to do that. I'm sorry if I'm making this sound a bit more protracted than some of you might like, but it's really important that we deal with anything that's rightly above the line in public session. It's a transparency issue, isn't it?
Okay.
And then we'll move over as soon as. But if you'd like to give us your list, then at least Mr. Cotton can be thinking about those aspects as well.
Okay, well, you might, as I go through each point, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there are 6 of them, and it might be that you'll recognise immediately which ones would have to be discussed below the line.
Thank you.
So the first point was the roles and terms of reference for councillors appointed to the BH Life and BH Life Enterprises Board. The second was the currency and validity of the extant agreement. The third one was the council procedures for agreeing BH Live business strategies and plans. The next one is the impact to the BCP Council of BH Live and BH Live Enterprises operations outside of the BCP Council area. The fifth one, the Council's procedures for monitoring the financial performance of BH Live and its BH Live Enterprises subsidiary, and how this performance impacts on the Council's responsibilities, reputation and finances. And the last one, the BH Life Financial Reserves Policy and any possible implications for the BCP Council.
Thank you very much for those. Mr. Cotton, do you have, which of those do you think you can do in public session?
Well, I think we've discussed the
first one we can come back to, because
we can come back to. Yeah, absolutely. The validity of the document, I think we can do that in public. It's the short answer to that is it is a current contract with 15 years left to run. That's a matter of public record. If there's any more further details about the contents of that contract, I think we probably need to take that below the line. In terms of business plans, yes, there's a provision in the contract that business plans are agreed by the council. That is again, that's something that the council has publicly stated it wants to do. And in the past, those business plans have been discussed at overview and scrutiny committees and with senior officers and so on. So that's something we can talk about, I think. In terms of financial procedures and financial reserves policy, I think we are perhaps then getting into areas that we need to talk below the line.
Agreed. All right, so would you like to proceed with your questions over those that Mr. Cotton has identified as being appropriate above the line, Councillor Bartlett?
Yeah, yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll just so you can see my pretty face. How's that? Thank you, Bill. Okay, the roles in terms of reference for councillors appointed to BH Live and BH Live Enterprises Board. Well, first, I've got to just tell you what a torturous route it was actually becoming a director of BH Live. I mean, out of the blue, I got a set of forms to register at Companies House. I'd not been asked if I wanted to be a member of the board. I knew nothing about it. In fact, I sent the papers back to Democratic Services because I thought it was a mistake. Anyway, as it transpired, I had been volunteered. So then I set about finding out what this was all about. So there was no brief, no nomination of an officer, no liaison, nothing. So I contacted some of the earlier directors. I looked at Companies House to see who they were. And of course, this was actually in August of last year, and I discovered that actually 3 of the councillors were still on the board, and they had not been councillors since the previous May. So there was a period from May right through, in fact, right through to September and then November, where councillors were still on the board, but were ex-councillors. They were still on the board, and there'd been no representation on the board from the council at all from May right through to September. So that gives you a flavour for the start of it. I then thought I'd better do a bit of research on this. I did speak to a couple of the ex-members. I didn't really get a lot of satisfaction from that. So I then thought, well, the best place to start is with the contract. So I approached the contracts department through Democratic Services and then had to explain, well, first of all, it was refused. I couldn't get access to it because it was a confidential document. It then took me over a month before there was an agreement that I could actually read it. So I actually got the document, I think probably the end of October, having been a director since September and having been asked back on the 22nd of August. So it was a bit of a torturous route. I then attended a board meeting, and having read the contract, I started to wonder about the relationship between the council and in particular the role that we had within it, because I could see that there was some potential for conflict there. But of course, I didn't really understand what our role on there was. It was very confused because both the Enterprises and Trust Board were sort of running together under one meeting. They weren't separated out. So it was very difficult. So I actually decided to ask for a clarification of this from Democratic Services, and I was not alone in my concern. Actually, all the other members that have been nominated had the same view, and so it was actually back in I think probably February that I'd approached the Democratic Services for advice and to get some guidance on some of these issues. And I'm still waiting all these months later for it. It never came through. So I think what I'm saying is that there was definitely a need to brief councillors so they could represent the council, so they understood what they were there for. They understood what there was required to do under the contract. It would have required at least a brief, a top-level brief, to talk about the structure of the company, etc. And that I think that's a bit of a failing. You appoint people to these boards, very important role, as some individuals have never had any experience as a director, etc. So the upshot of this is that there is a real need for a bit of training, maybe a briefing paper, just the bare bones of it. But at the moment there's absolutely nothing, and I think that's a bit risky given the scope and extent of the business that BH Live actually does. And without that kind of background, it's very difficult for any individual to play a useful role on the trust board. So I think that sums up the first line of my concerns. So I don't know if you want me to just carry on to the next point, Chair.
I think it would be best, Councillor Bartlett, because I've got other people wanting to speak, if you just run through those that have been ruled, if you like, in public, and then I'll ask Mr. Cotton to pick them up after you've finished.
Okay. Well, just talking about the agreement, yes, it is a valid agreement, of course, but it is out of date. Certainly the one that I've got a copy of. You know, the business plan, for example, covers probably the first year. Well, it was covered for the first 5 years to 2015. There's no updated business plan on it. Here we are in 2020. Then I'm not saying there isn't one, but I can see it. It's not included in there. The level of fee paid, etc., is not included in. It's not shown in there. So, you know, a lot has changed too about the nature of the business that VH Live is doing, and it's not reflected in the agreement. The agreement is very much Bournemouth centric. You know, it's about what BH Live was set up to do to serve the residents of Bournemouth. But BH Live's operations are far in excess of that now, as you're probably aware. And so those areas of business outside of the Bournemouth area do not seem to be covered in any way. And that's why I say, you know, is it valid? You know, does it remain fit for purpose? Really, that agreement does it need looking at? Does it need updating? So that was the reason I raised that particular point. Shall I carry on, Chair?
Yes, please, Councillor Bartlett.
Okay. There was one board meeting I went to where, and I don't want to get into the detail of what was said, but it certainly raised the question in my mind about the council's role in agreeing the basic business strategy for BH Live. There is provision within the contract for the council to be very much engaged in the strategy formulation and agreement of it. Actually, it's quite strong on that. But given what I was seeing, I couldn't see how that engagement had been carried out. I'm not saying it hadn't been; it may well have been going on, but I just didn't see how it was happening. So, you know, I didn't understand whether if the procedures were there, whether they were actually being carried out. I couldn't see it, and I had no knowledge of whether they were or not. So that's why I've raised that one. I don't know. I'm not sure if Mr. Cotton mentioned the impacts of the BCP Council, BH Live and BH Live Enterprises operations outside of the BCP Council area. Maybe that's one that we should talk about under the line, I think, probably.
Correct. Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think probably the council procedures for monitoring financial performance, etc., is probably another one as well that is probably best discussed under the line. And probably the last point as well, I would suggest, in terms of reserves policy.
Yep, I think I agree with you, Councillor Bartlett. So we'll come back to that presently, if you're all right with that. Mr. Cotton, would you like to respond to those that Councillor Bartlett has raised that are relevant for this part of the meeting?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Bartlett, for raising those issues. I think obviously there's obviously room for improvement in terms of yourself and board members in a similar position who've just started receiving a briefing from officers. That's obviously wasn't done as a matter of course. You know, I'd always like to say that the door is always open. So, you know, we're always here to help, but we could have obviously been much more proactive in terms of coming up with a briefing pack and so on for you. In terms of the issues around the contract, you're right. You know, 10 years is a long time, isn't it? And things have changed in over 10 years. The company is expanding into different areas and is doing different operations. So I think it's probably time, the BCP coming in is probably a good time to review the contract relationship with BH Live, to update the contract and to have that negotiation and discussion. So I think that's a very valid point. In terms of business planning and so on, I think I think that the way we would see the business planning is, one, the councillors on the board are there to sort of represent that sort of wider the wider councillors and the community, and to have their input into strategic thinking, into the away days and wider business planning. In terms of the more detailed business planning, that would be covered by regular meetings with the portfolio holder and contract manager to sort of sign off those more detailed operational plans.
Thank you, Mr. Cotton.
Okay.
Sorry, Chair.
So do you want to come back, Councillor Bartlett?
Yes, if you wouldn't mind, Chair. Thank you. I mean, in terms of the procedures for agreeing business strategies and plans, there are very specific procedures in the contract that describe how this process should work. It's very specific. The timescales for the preparation of the business plans, the dates that they should be approved by, etc., etc. They're all very definite. They do require the council's executive team to be involved in it. It is a formal agreement process, and it's outside of what the councillors on the actual trust board would be doing. So, it is there. I just don't think it's been happening. That's the picture I'm getting. In terms of opening your door, Mr. Cotton, thank you very much for that offer. But I did actually go to Democratic Services back in February with the very issues that I'm raising now. And, so that's one of the reasons why this is now in front of the ANG committee. All right, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brooke, you've told me that your RTS has been partly answered. I'll make sure that you're in there first when we get into the confidential session as you've requested. Councillor Dunlop.
It was just a quick one. It was just to comment on Councillor Bartlett about trading inside the BCP area and outside the BCP area. I think we have to be very careful that that's not really a remit for this panel. Where they trade and their trading operations is, as Mr. Cotton said, a matter for the portfolio holder in discussion with BH Live. It's a strategic issue, and it should not be part of our discussion. How they report and how we agree that, yes, but I just think we need to be careful that we're not suggesting how they should trade. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I haven't got any other requests to speak in the sidebar, so that indicates that it's probably the appropriate time to go below the line. So could I have a move, please?
Councillor Williams, I'll move. We go below the line.
Thank you very much. And seconder?
I'll second.
Seconded by... So, Democratic, do you need a moment to facilitate that?
So I'm afraid I didn't catch Councillor Williams
It was moved by the Vice Chairman and it was seconded by Councillor Cox.
So, Chairman, that would be that. Chris, are we back in public now? Yeah. So the proposal by Councillor Williams, seconded by Councillor Cox, would be that under Section 100A(4) of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 in part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act, and that the public interest in withholding the information outweighs such interest in disclosing the information. So, Chairman, you might like to ask your committee if they all agree to that resolution.
Thank you. Now I've got to move. I will. On the usual basis, doing this electronically. Could anybody indicate if they are not in agreement, please? I have no indication, and I think we can take that all are in agreement. It's a unanimous decision, Mr. Hanton.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. We're now back in open session, and we have three recommendations coming forward from Audit and Governance this evening as a result of those deliberations, having taken into account the public report, the public session and presentation by Mr. Cotton, and the further issues that we needed to discuss in private session a moment ago. So, Mr. Hanton, could you read out what it is that the committee is now proposing to resolve?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So I'm looking at the recommendations in the report, and the proposal will be as follows. Firstly, the council provides greater clarity over the role and expectations of councillors who are members of the BH Live board and its subsidiaries. And then two, that BH Live brackets alongside similar organisations such as SLM and Lighthouse close brackets are brought to Overview and Scrutiny Committee at least annually. And then the third part of the recommendation is that, given incomplete information at this stage, it would be prudent to defer further discussion until all relevant information can be made available, so that a detailed set of governance recommendations can be made. And that would end the recommendation, Chairman. So the parts 3 and 4 would be on the provisional paper, would be removed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hanton. I think it would be advisable on these three recommendations to have a vote from members of the committee, and I wonder whether you could undertake that, please.
Just to complete that, then, Chairman, can I just have in the public session the proposed and seconders for those recommendations that I've read out?
I think it was proposed by Councillor Cox. And seconded by me from the chair.
Is that Councillor Cox and is Councillor Cox okay with that?
Yes, he's waved to me, so I think he is.
Oh.
He doesn't usually wave to me.
Okay then, Chairman. So
do it more often if you want.
So what I'll do now is read out the names of the councillors, and could you indicate whether you're for, against, or you're abstaining? Councillor Beesley.
For.
Councillor Andrews.
For.
Councillor Brooke.
For.
Councillor Butt.
For.
Councillor Cox.
For.
Councillor Dunlop.
For.
Councillor McCormack.
For.
Councillor White.
For.
And Councillor Williams.
For.
That's unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hanton, and thank you to all colleagues on the committee for the time you spent on this evening. I think it's been worthwhile. Thank you to the officers for the work you've put in preparation and at the meeting this evening on that item. I think we're now ready to move on to item 9 on the agenda. I am conscious of the time, and I would like to ask officers who are presenting reports to be succinct in what they have to tell us, because what I don't want to do is to run out of time towards the later items on the agenda and find that they become overly rushed. So if I could now ask Mr. Filmer, who's the Finance Manager, to speak to the Treasury Management Monitoring Outturn, an update for the quarter 2020-21. Mr. Filmer.
Thank you, Chairman. It's actually Daniel Povey here. I'm afraid Matt Filmer was taken poorly late this afternoon, so I'll be presenting this report. He was due to be here, but he couldn't. Yes, this basically tells the story of our Treasury management activities, both for the last financial year and at Q1. It's good news on both fronts, I think. The 2019-20 position was a surplus of 1.4 million on our Treasury management activity. largely due to reduced borrowing costs. And that was in the main due to the agreed disaggregation position for the old Dorset County Council debt, which was finally agreed in February 2020. For 2021, it's also a good news. A surplus of 112,000 is forecast, and that's due mainly to lower interest rates. I think there's probably three main points, Chairman, that I would just draw members of the committee's attention to, if I can. The one is in the economic background. I think the key point there, with all the economic uncertainty, is that the bank rate, which is currently at 0.1%, is not due to go up. It's not forecast to go up now until mid-2022. That is in contrast to when we set the budgets, when we were already at 0.75% on the bank rate, when the forecasts were that it would go up to 1.25%. So we seem to be in a period for a couple of years of that sustained low interest rate. In terms of paragraph 11, it talks about a consultation with the PWLB. That's one of the main sources of public sector borrowing funds. There's a consultation going on, which is just finishing tomorrow, in fact, about changes to the rules for accessing that debt. And that's all about discouraging local authorities from undertaking commercial investment. Commercial investment being where you basically borrow to take on something that's basically for yield, not for service delivery. The basic change that they're consulting on is if you have a commercial investment in your capital programme, you can't access PWLB borrowing or rates. So in order for them to discourage commercial activity from local authorities, the PWLB put their rates up by 1% overnight in October, and the feeling is once the new rules have been implemented after the consultation, there's an expectation that the rates will go back down again. So that's quite an important point for when we're thinking about both our capital programme going forward and commercial investment, but also, you know, what future borrowing rates might be doing. The next point, Chairman, is actually on our borrowing, paragraph 16 and 17 of the report. Members will see that as at the end of the financial year, we had £261 million worth of borrowing on the balance sheet. That is actually an under-borrowed position, and that's consistent with what we set out in the Treasury Management Strategy at the beginning of the year. According to our capital financing requirements, so the assets that we've built and bought, we could have borrowing of 440 million. So we're under-borrowed to the tune of about 170 million, something like that. That is quite a prudent position for where we are at the moment. Obviously, using our own cash reserves saves on borrowing costs, and also it eliminates counterparty risks, and you know, as interest rates aren't forecast to go up, it's quite a nice place to be for now. I think what we'd want to do is see what the results are of the PWLB consultation, see what borrowing rates do after that, and then see if there's an opportune time to reassess our debt portfolio then. The last point, I think, of interest to members would be on our investments at the year end, paragraph 19. Members will see from that we had quite a lot with the debt management account, about 26 million. That's basically the government's bank account, if you like, where you can place investments. It's probably about the safest UK investment you can have, but it comes at a cost to interest, so it pays a low return because of that. The reason that we put significant funds in there at the year end was because that was when we started to receive significant COVID-19 funding from the government, and basically, well, there was that uncertainty of the economic fallout, the effects of COVID-19 on financial institutions. We wanted to put the money that we'd be using to support the community in a safe place. So I think they're probably the main points, and in the interests of brevity, Chairman, I'll stop there.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Povey. Very concise and very well presented. Thank you. I haven't had anybody indicating they wish to speak in the sidebar. I think the report is self-explanatory with your further additions just a moment ago. We are asked to note the two functions, I would ask members, are you prepared, are you happy to note? Anybody dissenting, please could you send me, Councillor Cox.
Sorry, can I just ask just a quick one about Handelsbanken, on what rating the Handelsbanken have at the moment?
I haven't got the latest. Sorry, Chairman. They'll have the minimum requirement of A-, which is according to our strategy. I can have a look in the morning what their latest actual rating is. I haven't got that to hand, I'm afraid.
Thank you. In that case, colleagues, are we prepared to note both recommendations? If I haven't heard anything from anybody, in that case, agreed to note. Thank you very much. Moving on then to item 10 on the agenda, governance of budget monitoring. We've got with us this evening Nicola Webb, who's the Assistant Chief Financial Officer in the absence of Mr. Richins. Could I ask you to present the report, Ms. Webb, please?
Thank you, Chairman. So this report has been produced to enable the committee to reflect on the recommendations of the June 2020 budget monitoring report to Cabinet and consider any recommendations needed in respect of the Council's financial regulations. So a very brief summary of the report. Clearly there was an expectation raised in March of a substantial decision coming forward regarding a fundamental budget rebase due to COVID-19. The report decision instead was for the progress in the development of the budget mitigation strategy to be noted. So I think that's what is being considered this evening. So just really to say the main reason why the rebase was not considered appropriate at that time, and remember the report was largely written by the end of May, was that the full impact on costs of the pandemic and recovery was still emerging and government support not yet fully resolved. Just as examples of what were unknown at June and of which subsequently have come to be known is, for example, resort opening costs, and some of that was informed by the beach emergency, were not known at the time of the June report, and those costs have now been estimated. The social care market support at the time of June, we had estimates in there to support the market, for example, up to the end of September, but we now know government expectation that, and indeed the market itself, is going to need to be further support to that market over the rest of the year, and that that's going to potentially be several millions of pounds of support, and as we've potentially greater support for leisure centres. So those were unknown in June, and we know those extra pressures have come to the fore since. Similarly, income recovery, we've opened attractions earlier than we'd allowed in that June report. And certainly there's been recovery in car parking income due to the good weather. Of course, all of those things may take a turn for the worse again, with a further outbreak or during the winter. But at the moment, if we assume that those things are back on track, the expectation would be better. But I think that highlights where a lot of our issues and pressures around lost income. Clearly, there's a lot more of the year yet to go, and we're not really in a position to know the final outcome for those things. Similarly, government support for expenditure has increased. We received an extra 3 million recently in July. Government have also announced there's going to be further specific report for lost income, above 5% of the budget in certain areas, but we're still awaiting the details of those, and that will obviously help the overall position to help against those extra pressures, but we don't yet know clearly the scale of either of those things. And we've also received other specific grants for public health, for track and trace, for reopening the public realm and support to communities. So it's still, at June it was a very moving picture. We know a bit more now, and clearly there's probably still more to come. So in terms of the report, it was that we're talking about, it was this consistent approach that had been taken in last year for BCP Council, other legacy councils similarly. We identify budget issues early in the year. They do change clearly as we go through the year, and then only towards the end of the year do we start making provision for unavoidable matters? The report also includes examples in the appendix from other councils of how they've approached this, and I think that report shows that BCP clearly is not out of step with what most councils are doing in that surveyed group. So the issue for committee is, do the BCP financial regulations, I think, adequately cover the scenario that we found ourselves in this year, or would the committee recommend changes to those? And in the report, paragraph 2 summarises the relevant financial regulations for members of the committee to consider this evening. That's all I really want to say, Chair. Happy to obviously to take questions about what's in the report or any other matters relevant here.
Thank you very much indeed, Ms Webb. I wonder whether, Chief Executive, you could perhaps give us some commentary as well. Most specifically focused on all member engagement over budgetary issues, and probably following on from our email correspondence of a few weeks ago. I think it's important that we see this in the round, and given the recommendation that's in front of us, we're being asked to think, I think, a little more laterally than just noting the report. Could you do that for me, Chief Executive?
Certainly, Chairman. Thanks for the invitation. I think there's a number of issues in here, some of which I think relate to the Constitution, the way the Constitution is worded, and what delegations that provides for. I think there are also issues about how we engage with members more widely in setting the budget. It's probably just worth mentioning in this context the very fine political balance that we have with this council, with a very close balance at the full council. So I think that does change the perspective, but it doesn't change the Constitution. And I think one of the issues is that we need to find ways of engaging more widely across the council in setting the overall budget. That's one of the lessons I think we've picked up, certainly as officers, from last year, because there are clearly ideas coming forward, and we've seen an alternative budget reset paper which was considered at the Cabinet, which contained a number of suggestions, and actually, if we're going to maximise the value of the councillor cohort, then from our point of view, we want to try and get some of those ideas fed in early in the process. So we have thought about engagement with a wider group of councillors as we head towards the budget process in February, and certainly the leader is encouraging us to ensure that we've got a long lead in time so that we can engage in those views. I think there is a question when the budget varies, and strictly speaking, the Constitution requires us to go to Cabinet regarding increases in budget allocation. Strictly speaking, it doesn't require us to go for decreases, but there are issues that we need to address from that, because that can leave a lot of councillors outside of the loop of that discussion. So I think we've picked up some lessons in terms of the strict interpretation of the Constitution over the last few months. And as the budget varies, the other issue, I guess, is that COVID-19 as a global pandemic took us all by surprise and has had a more major impact on the budget than almost any other circumstance that I can recall. In fact, probably any other circumstance that I can recall. Even when the government in 2010 introduced in-year budget cuts, they were not of the scale of the movement that we've had to do due to COVID-19. However, I guess this is just one issue for us worth reflecting on, is as the government makes more tranches of money available to support us, so we get an easier budget position, given what we have at the moment. I think the current forecast, given government grant announcements, given our assessment of the income grant, and given the savings and reductions we've made during the year, actually we should end up with somewhere near a balanced budget. And I'd just like to emphasise I say that on the 30th of July, not really knowing what's happening by way of second wave or any other future impacts that COVID-19 might have on our budget. I don't know if that's helpful as context.
Thank you very much, Chief Executive. It is helpful. I think it recognises and picks up some of the points that I've been raising with you from a governance perspective outside of the meeting. I think perhaps it would be helpful if at a later stage, that is after this evening, if you could convey your thoughts and message to all members of Audit and Governance, so that we all understand exactly what the position is in terms of the governance issues around the budget ongoing.
Okay, happy
Would
to do
that be something you could do for us?
Yes, very happy to do that, Chair.
Thank you very much. And if you want to pick that up offline after the meeting as to specifically and in how much detail, then I'm obviously happy to do that. I haven't had any members indicate that they wish to speak on this item. So I think probably what we need to do is to follow through in the way I've suggested, with the Chief Executive coming back to us, and to note the report that we've heard this evening and the comments made by Ms Webb. Would members support that as the way forward? Again, if anybody doesn't agree, could they just indicate in the sidebar? Okay, that is agreed. For the record, Mr Hanton. So that takes us on, I think, to item 11, which is risk management, corporate risk register update. Could I ask Fiona Manton, the Risk and Insurance Manager, to briefly introduce the report? Ms Manton.
Thank you. This is the quarterly update in relation to the Council's corporate risk register. Over the last several months, the risk landscape has changed significantly, and this report outlines the changes and plans in terms of the corporate risk register and the COVID-19 risk register. In this report, paragraph 6, it's outlined that for this quarter's reporting, the information provided does not include specific detail, but updates are provided in relation to a couple of the corporate risks, being CR1, failure to respond to the needs arising from a changing demography, and CR5, failure to plan effectively for Brexit. The corporate risk register, including these risks, is now the subject of a comprehensive review, which I'll cover in a moment. Paragraphs 9 to 12 of the report on page 47, the creation of the COVID-19 risk register is introduced and is included as Appendix 2 to this report. Members will recall this register was created following a virtual workshop held in April, which proved very helpful exercise in terms of capturing the risks and collating a draft risk register. Due to the rapidly changing environment, these risks were simply quantified in terms of high, medium and low, and this is shown in Appendix 2 of the report. In considering and reviewing the risks included on both the corporate and the COVID-19 risk registers, during this quarter it became apparent and very clear that many of the corporate risks needed to be refocused due to the continuing response to the pandemic and also as a result of any work towards a recovery phase. Following discussions, it was agreed that the risk register would be subject to a fundamental review with the intention of incorporating the risks identified in the COVID-19 risk register and that process, and to create a new set of risks. This process is now underway. Further on in the report, I talk about service development. Work is ongoing to finalise the draft risk management policy for BCP Council. We are continuing as a team to horizon scan and disseminate risk information across services, and we also undertake an annual sense check to review our corporate risk register against others, and the outcome of this will be fed into the comprehensive review that's currently underway. That's a summary of my report, and I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ms Manton, and thank you for being so succinct. Appreciated. Councillor Cox.
Yeah, thank you. I welcome the report, but can I just make a suggestion that the corporate risk register is not COVID-19 specific, and that we include all sorts of catastrophic events that may happen. Just by naming it this particular virus, then I think you're maybe limiting it, and that we should have it on there permanently as a catastrophic event risk register. Thank you.
Ms Manton, bear in mind the session that we had, the workshop session we had about the COVID risk register. Would you like to comment on that?
Certainly, the workshop that we held was to identify risks that were particular to the pandemic and how they impacted on the risks facing the authority. Generally speaking, under the corporate risk register, we do have more generic risks around the everyday risks the authority faces, including a response to any activation of the emergency plan. And we'll continue to make the risk register as wide and as forward-facing as we can, and future-proof in terms of trying to identify risks that we may face going forward.
Thank you. Did you want to come back, Councillor Cox?
No, that's fine. Just an idea.
Mr. Osgathorpe.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to be clear that what you have in front of you is actually both versions of our risk register. So the first appendix, although they're not numbered, I appreciate that, is the generic strategic risk register for the council outside of COVID, and then the second is a COVID specific risk register that was developed as a result of the workshop in April. Is that not right, Fiona?
Ms. Banton?
Yes, that's correct. Yes, the first one, which is CR1 to CR11, is the corporate risk register, and CV1 onwards is the COVID-19 risk register as devised during the April workshop.
Thank you very much. So, members, are you happy to note the update provided by Ms. Manton in her report this evening? If you don't agree with that, could you signify in the sidebar, please? I've heard from nobody. So, Ms. Manton, thank you very much indeed for your work on this report. Much appreciated, and we will note the contents of it. Thank you very much. So moving on from there to item 12 on the agenda, which is the establishment of the Constitution Working Group. I think, Mr. Jones, you're going to introduce the report, and then I will say a few words before we move on from there. Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, I will be brief. The Audit and Governance Committee, as you know, is responsible for maintaining an overview of the Council's constitution and governance arrangements. We used a time-limited working group recently for the recent review, which proved to be very effective, and the committee is therefore asked to consider the establishment of a permanent working group to continue this work. It's proposed that the working group comprise of 5 councillors made up of 2 councillors from the Conservative group, 1 unaligned councillor, and 2 from the remaining political groups. Just to clarify, there is no restriction on where members for the working group can be drawn from. However, if subject to their availability, the working group members were drawn from this committee, members may wish to consider extending an invitation in a non-councillors when considering specialist areas. Pass it back to you, Chairman, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Jones. Thank you. Members, you'll recall that we had a working group which dealt with the issues that were in front of it, brought to it already, and we took those forward to Council either through direct recommendation or through debate by Council in the case of one item. Several months ago, I wrote to all members of the Council to ask them whether there were any other issues that they individually considered by a future working group. So the working group we had was very much task and finish, and we need to consider the successor to it. I've had quite a number of responses, and most of them concern fairly detailed issues regarding planning, which is fine. And I would propose to open that process up again once we've dealt with the issues that have come to us. And I think currently Mr. Hanton is tabulating those so that we can, if you like, get on with it with the new grouping as soon after this meeting as possible, and then bring forward those for consideration by the committee once the working group have done their work. And that seems to me to be a good way forward. I think that we discharged our obligations very well last time, and it is for me seen to be very much a subgroup of audit and governance. It's seen as part of our work to collate these constitutional proposals, to look at them carefully, perhaps to invite in those who have a particular interest outside on a non-voting basis. For example, on the planning issues, we might want to hear from the head of planning as to what his views are before the working group made up its mind. We might want to hear from a practical, putting them into practice point of view, the view of the chairman of planning committee as well. And those are all done in the working group outside of the Audit and Governance Committee itself. So it seems to me we've got a fairly good platform to move forward from on the basis of the work that we had undertaken previously. I just wanted to update, particularly for those who perhaps haven't been as involved as those who were on the working group. I've got an RTS from Councillor Dunlop.
Thank you, Chairman. I think you've touched on what I want to say, really. This is, I don't agree with the recommendation. This is a subgroup of the Audit and Governance Committee, and we bring forward recommendations, that committee brings forward recommendations to the main committee, which in turn we make those recommendations to Cabinet and on to Council. And I believe that this working group should therefore draw its membership from the A and G committee only, as it is in this remit of this committee, and it's our work to do. And I would say that if anyone is particularly and especially interested in audit and governance, they have that route, as you've just illustrated, to contact the chairman or ask if we could look into things or on specific issues. They can be involved, and I think it should be by invitation only. It is our work and it should be within our remit. And I can see that others wish to speak, but I'm ready to make a move that recommendation is changed, Chairman. I don't know if you want to have a debate first or whether I can call for a second.
Well, you've indicated you wish to make a move. I do have one other speaker, but it would be normal practice to take the move at this stage and to seek a seconder, and then I'll come back to the other speaker.
Councillor White here. I'm quite happy to second that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor White. Could we hear your move, Councillor Dunlop, and then I'll come to any others who've asked to speak. Councillor Dunlop.
Sorry, I need to take my microphone off. Right, okay, I've sort of scribbled something out, but I think I'd perhaps like to expand slightly on what's there. So we're saying that the Constitution Review Working Group be established comprising 5 councillors. I would say drawn from the committee. So I'd like to change, please, from the whole council to from the A&G committee. I'm quite happy with the suggestions that it's 2 from Conservatives, 1 unaligned, and 2 from the remaining political groups. So it's just a change of the source there. But I think what might be useful is, given that some of our members actually are working during the day, that we should add some supplementary bits to that, please, that we hold the working group meetings are held at 6, and then picking up what you've said about specialist invitation, add another item, perhaps A, B, C, where appropriate, other relevant councillors and officers shall be invited to attend meetings of the working group on specialist areas in a non-voting capacity. So I would say the current recommendation becomes A, but it's restricted to audit and governance. We add in B that the meetings of the working group be held at 6, and then C, where appropriate, other relevant councillors and officers shall be invited to attend meetings of the working group on specialist areas in a non-voting capacity. Is that okay?
Thank you, Councillor Dunlop. Are you still prepared to second that, Councillor White, now you've heard the detail of the proposal?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I mean, I think it worked okay last time. I see no reason to change it, and I think we should indeed involve other members as appropriate. But I think it's within the remit of this group, and as I say, it worked fine last time, so no reason to change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It did work very well last time, but I think we're missing a trick by not opening it up to the rest of the council. I do think there are other people on the council who may be more qualified than certain members of the Audit and Governance Committee. I don't think we should make this a closed shop. I don't want to get trade unionist about this. I think we should, if there are other people willing and better qualified to fill one of these positions, then I think that we should be able to allow that. I think that would be perfectly reasonable. I would also, so I would like the original wording kept, obviously, but I would also like, just as a matter of interest, to change the last few words, because there is a unity alliance. So there's the two from the not remaining political groups, but I think that should come from the two from the unity alliance. That's me.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cox. I'd like Councillor Dunlop to consider whether she changed those couple of words in her move. But in the meantime, could I go to Vice Chairman?
Thank you, Chairman. Actually, Councillor White preempted me, so I just wanted to second the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Brooke.
Right. Thank you, Chair. Just get the video machine up again. There we are. No, I can't support what's being proposed. I'm very happy to support the original recommendation on the paper. Picking up on, I think, your comment when you were elected Chair to be as inclusive as possible is the way to go, and just by inviting people to come along and not be voting members doesn't actually do that. It doesn't really involve them, and I think while the committee working group should be the 5 as being proposed, it should be from the whole council. There's nothing in the constitution that says it has to be made up from all members of the Audit and Governance Committee. Indeed, there's nothing in the constitution that says any working party has to be made up from the committee, from the specific committees. So I'm quite happy to go along with the current original recommendation rather than what is now being proposed by Councillor Dunlop.
Thank you, Councillor Brooke. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will support what Councillor Mike Brooke has just said. It's quite strange that we're trying to change effectively the constitution of the council by restricting the membership of this working party to just members of Audit and Governance, when, as Councillor Mike Brooks has just said, the constitution doesn't say that on working parties generally. And why should a mere 11 or 12% of the councillors decide in terms of recommendations back to this committee what changes to the constitution should apply? I think it should be widened out to other councillors. Yes, members of this committee have got specialisations on financial matters and things like that, but there's other councillors who, I don't know, being JPs or, chairman of governors at schools, and vast experience accumulated over the years, whereby they may be a very valid member of the working party, reference constitutional matters. So I do not support the change to the recommendation. I will be voting against it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Andrews. If I just make a point of clarification to a point that Councillor Brooke made a moment ago. When I was speaking about being inclusive, I was referring specifically to being inclusive across audit and governance, and the various different parties that are represented on audit and governance, and trying to make sure that our work as a committee was inclusive of all of those 9 members. So just wanted to make sure that I'd given that clarification. And it's certainly in terms of the working party that we had before, I solidly felt that it was taken by all, that it was a subgroup of the Audit and Governance Committee, and it was our work to process suggestions coming forward to changes in the Constitution, to then bring those back from the working party to Audit and Governance Committee before making recommendations which inevitably then get discussed in another place. And so there was a logic in my mind to how we did that, and hence the reason I made the comment that I thought it worked particularly well, and that's why I went out to all members of the council several months ago to try to refresh that process. And as I say, they were mainly planning issues, and I think that we would be absolutely right to bring in the people who are either the officers or members who are practitioners in that before making a decision on the recommendation. So that's just a few points of clarification I just wanted to bring forward. Councillor Brooke, I think you wanted to come back.
Fine, thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you for that clarification. I was thinking while you were talking about that, or while giving that clarification, that actually if we take 5 members from this current committee, that's a majority. So the majority of the committee as a working group will be presenting to the rest of the committee their findings. It would give far more weight if members of the council, as opposed to the Audit and Governance Committee, actually were making those recommendations in the first place, and the 9 of this committee discussed the recommendations before they were presented to council. I think that's a far more open, transparent and inclusive approach than it all being kept within the confines of Audit and Governance Committee.
Thank you, Councillor Brooke. Councillor Cox.
The other point that Councillor Dunlop was wanting to put in there, I think, was making sure that all committees were at 6 p.m. And frankly, I don't think that's going to be feasible or practical. So, I would strongly suggest that it's up to the committee to decide what the timing of these meetings are, and I don't think it should be restricted by setting artificial times. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. I haven't had anybody else indicate that they wish to speak.
Kevin, can I help you with this? It's
I'm just going to say, Mr. Hanton, can you help me with this, because I think
we've got a proposition from Councillor Dunlop, seconded by Councillor White. That's at the moment. That's the only proposition that we have to vote on. I can read that out to you. So the text on the agenda isn't a proposition; it's just there as a recommendation from officers. So if members could either vote on Councillor Dunlop's proposal obviously vote for or against it, or members could propose an amendment to that Councillor Dunlop's proposition, which we don't have to vote on.
That is the correct constitutional procedure. Yes, Mr. Hanton, I agree.
Chairman, would you like me to respond to any of the points made, or do you want to go straight to voting on the...
Well, I was about to do that, actually, but Mr. Hanton was anxious to remind us of the procedure. So, yes, if you could do so, please, as the proposer of the motion, Councillor Dunlop.
Thank you. I understand what is being said, but I think it's going to me, it's about accountability. The working group, the Constitution Working Group is a permanent feature of audit and governance, and it changes according to work that we're doing. And I think the idea that every time you start a new piece of work, you throw out this invitation to anybody each time you start is going to be quite unwieldy. It's not a task and finish group. It is, you're quite right, Chairman, it is a subgroup of the Audit and Governance Committee, and I don't think we want to turn it into a free-for-all. We're accountable, the committee is accountable, and we make those recommendations. So my motion, as I have proposed it, I would like it to stand. And the reason I have suggested putting in a time is because I've seen so many of my colleagues, not just within my own group, but other groups who say, oh God, why do people keep hold meetings in the day? I can't attend that. I can't do this. So given that by invitation only, we would like to include people who have certain expertise, we need to recognise that they may well be at work. A lot of the councillors here, fortunately, are a good deal younger than some of us, and I think we need to recognise a reasonable time after their normal working day. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Dunlop. I haven't received any other indication, therefore I haven't received anybody who wishes to make an amendment. So I think, Mr Hanton, we need to go to a vote on the move that's been made by Councillor Dunlop, seconded by Councillor White.
Yes, Chairman. Would you like me to read that out?
I'd be delighted. Yes, please. It's in three parts, I think.
Three parts, yes. So part A, a Constitution Review Working Group be established comprising 5 councillors drawn from the Audit and Governance Committee, 2 from the Conservative Group, 1 unaligned councillor, and 2 from the remaining political groups.
Could I just stop you there so that we don't have to repeat the whole thing? I did ask, and I'm sorry I forgot, Councillor Dunlop, are you happy with the wording of that third part of there, rather than what I think Councillor Cox was saying, which was the Unity Alliance?
I'm
not sure it makes any
well,
difference.
I'm just taking, let me just go back to the original. 1 second. Could you give me just 1 second? From the remaining political groups, and to, well, I'm using the wording that's on the original recommendation, and 2 from the remaining political groups. So so Councillor Cox wants to, right? Is this a separate amendment?
No. It was just to be clear, Councillor Cox, were you suggesting instead of the wording that's on the paper, remaining political groups, you felt Unity Alliance was more appropriate? Is that what you were saying?
I do, because at the end of the day, there are 2 main blocks of voting on the council, the Conservative Party and the Unity Alliance grouping, and then there's the unaligned members. Yes. As we've talked about unaligned members, we should talk about the Unity Alliance.
Yes, so are you quite happy, Councillor Dunlop, to amend your wording just with that change from remaining political groups to Unity Alliance?
Yes, I'm fine. I was just using the existing wording, so that's absolutely fine.
Sorry to cut across you, Mr Hanton.
No problem at all. And then the second part would be that meetings of the working group be held at 6 p.m. and then C, that where appropriate, other relevant councillors and officers be invited to attend the meetings of the working group on specialist areas in a non-voting capacity.
Yeah, that's my move.
Thank you very much. So I've done the introduction to it. Mr Hanton, would you like to go to the vote?
Yeah, so Chairman, as previously, I'll call out the names of the members of the committee, and if members would like to indicate whether they're for, against or abstain. So,
I'm sorry to cut across you again. I think Councillor Andrews is signalling he wishes to speak.
Yes, he is.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, just quickly, because obviously one of the members of the working party will be an unaligned councillor. We only have one underlying councillor on the committee, correct me if I'm wrong, and bearing in mind these meetings will definitely be at 6 p.m, can Councillor Butt confirm that he can get away from work ready for that meeting at 6 p.m? You know, surely the time should fit in with him because he's definitely going to be on the working party.
Councillor Butt.
Sorry, Chair, my mic wasn't unmuting. That may be the case, but I do work shift patterns, so I do finish earlier sometimes and later. But, you know, majority of the councillors do have full-time jobs, and obviously they can't take time off all the time. So, I mean, having them at 6 o'clock would be appropriate, and I feel that is the case.
Thank you very much, Councillor Butt. And I'm afraid I missed Mr. Jones. Richard Jones, you wanted to say something.
Thank you, Chairman. Actually, it's been covered. It was referenced to Councillor Butt. Obviously, as an unaligned member, the recommendation would need to include that he is appointed if you are seeking for those appointments from the committee. So it's been covered, Chairman.
Thank you very much. And I'd be able to give you the two from the Conservatives as well, actually. So, Mr. Hanton, would you like to proceed to the vote, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So, Councillor Beesley.
For.
Councillor Andrews.
Against.
Councillor Brooke.
Against.
Councillor Butt.
For.
Councillor Cox.
Against.
Councillor Dunlop.
For.
Councillor McCormack.
Against.
And Councillor Williams.
For. What about Councillor White?
And thank you, Councillor White. Sorry, I've missed you off the. And then Councillor White.
For.
So that's 5 for, Chairman, and 4 against. So
Thank you very much, Mr. Hanton. So that is carried.
Yes, Chairman.
Do we need to go through the process of that now becomes the substantive motion because it is the only motion?
No, because that was the main motion. That was the.
We proceed to the recommendation. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, members. That concludes item 12 on the agenda. That takes us to item 13. It is 8:30. I don't know how much time we'll need to spend on these other items. Do members want a short break, or do you want to persevere to the end without one? Anybody who'd like to have a break, please could you indicate to me? No, nobody has. Oh, sorry, something just come through from Councillor Butt. Shall we just take 5 minutes? Would that be, so I make this 8:35. Could we reconvene promptly at 8:40, please, members? Just 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Regulation.
Sorry, can I just make sure we're online again?
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't realise that. Do you want me to start again?
I think so, Chairman. I think so. Yes, please.
Thank you, members. We'll now recommence the meeting at 8:40. We'll now take item 13 on the agenda, which is the use of regulation of investigatory powers annual report. I would like to ask Mr. Stannard, who is the Head of Audit and Management Assurance, please. Mr. Stannard.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. This report is for the 1920 financial year, and it's for complete transparency and openness, and to comply with best practice. We are compelled to report to Audit and Governance Committee whether the Council has used RIPA powers for the financial year 1920. This report summarises very briefly the Council hasn't used RIPA powers in 1920. There is quite a narrow range of incidences we can use the Act, and we are also required to follow the details within the Act if we were. So open to any questions, please, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Stannard. I haven't seen anything in the side panel from members. So on that basis, I assume that members have no questions. We're asked to, the recommendation asks us to note the report, which I take it we will agree to do unless somebody tells me otherwise. No mention in the sidebar again on that one. So thank you very much indeed, Mr. Stannard. We note your report. Takes us on to item 14 on the agenda, which is the annual breaches, waivers and exemptions report for 1920. Again, it's over to you, Mr. Stannard.
Thank you, Chair. The report in front of you summarises the waivers and breaches of financial regs, again in a full, open, complete disclosure. If we first tackle the subject of breaches, you'll see that we're comparing the 8 breaches in BCP Council with the 4 breaches that appeared in legacy councils. Obviously, no breaches is preferable, but the numbers are relatively small given the vast array of expenditure the council's incurring. So we're concluding that there is a good awareness of the financial regs in the authority, so the level of breaches is quite small. There's a section in the report in note number 3 onwards, and there's a more detail in section 4 covering the 2 material breaches. In summary, the particular trait on most of these breaches is that there is good reason for them, and actually if the officer had submitted a waiver in advance, these breaches were appropriate in the sense that there's good reasons. Shall I pause there if there's any questions on breaches?
It's probably easiest if you go through the rest of your presentation, Mr. Stannard, and we'll pick them up all together.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So the next section is on waivers. So waivers of financial regulations are where the CFO has received a request to waive some element of the financial regulations for good reason. There is a process in place, a governance process in place, which requires the sign-off of the service director, the head of strategic procurement to ensure the procurement is still lawful, and then the CFO's representative to ensure that the overall instance of the waiver is appropriate. The appendix attached to the report shows every single waiver, all 66 waivers that were approved for the 1920 financial year. And again, in the body of the report at note 12 onwards, I've picked out a couple of the larger waivers to emphasise the reasons for the approval of those waivers. Best will in the world, if a member has questions on any of the 66, I'm unlikely to be able to recall the exact reasons. So if, with your agreement, Chair, I will supply any information to a particular member via email and attach the information to the minutes, and I'll for Bob Hanson to put in public space.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stannard. I think probably if there are any, you might want to do that, but you might want to copy all members of the committee as well, so that we have complete transparency over the response.
Noted.
Do you want to?
No, that's all I wanted to cover, Chair. So I'm very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. And there are a couple. Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hear what Nigel said, but the figures seem to say there's been fairly large, particularly in terms of breaches, a very large increase, a doubling in the number. Appreciate it's only from 4 to 8, but a significant increase in the value from 3,000 to 171,000. In terms of the breaches, though, is there any sanction that might be brought to people that do breach the sanctions, even if it's a warning of some sort, because clearly they've breached the regulation? So is there any sanctions involved?
Yes. The process we go through is we very thoroughly investigate the reasons for each breach, and ultimately there is the option for disciplinary action. That's usually restricted where there is a negligent and absolute flagrant disregard to the financial regs. In most cases, this is the instances are where there might be some timing issues, for example, where there was a waiver process in train, yet the procurement went through and the waiver process wasn't completed in time. So that's a technical breach. So, yeah, in answer to Councillor Cox, there is an ultimate sanction of disciplinary action on an officer, but it is rarely used, and certainly it hasn't been used in any of the examples in this particular report.
Did you want to come back, Councillor Cox?
No, I think that sorts it out in terms of the breaches. In terms of the waivers and exemptions, though, again, there's been a significant increase from last year to this year, and that does concern me. I have to say that it's seen as the thing to do, and is again. I don't feel comfortable, shall we say, with the report at the moment. That it seems to be we seem to be waving it through when there's such a large increase.
Mr. Stannard.
Yes, could I perhaps draw members' attention to note 11 in the report? What this, the number of waivers is about a third less, so we've gone down from 90 to 66. We know that we were expecting that to be the case because a lot of waivers were put in place pre-LGR in readiness for the new council being formed, and it didn't make sense for certain contracts to be put in place. So there was a lot of particular trade was extending a legacy contract whilst the new council was formed, and then the new council would then try and amalgamate several contracts to form a new BCP contract, if you like. So that was a common trait, and that's why the numbers were particularly high last year in terms of volume. In terms of the comparison to financial, on a financial basis, the increase from 13.8 million from 8.5 million, it's just a fact that it depends what what contract we're talking about. So obviously there's a couple of larger contracts that you'll see in the detail on on note number 12, which obviously skews those numbers in terms of the overall financial value.
Councillor Cox, anything?
I just wanted to ask, did the three that are mentioned, which are the quite large ones, did they have anything to do with COVID, for instance? Did emergency things need to be put in place because of COVID?
No, Councillor Cox. These are all 1920 waivers, so they were approved before COVID bits, so to speak.
Okay.
Councillor Andrews.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, my query links into COVID-19. As Nigel's just mentioned, yes, these are historic, but obviously with the difficulty of communications with COVID-19, officers working from home, poor communications in terms of mobile signal or whatever, is there suitable systems in place whereby if an officer is in two minds as to what to do or what not to do, that they can make contact with somebody? Obviously, in a pre-COVID-19 situation, you can literally wander into somebody's office, sit down, have a chat, sort it out, get the waiver form sorted. But here, clearly, we need to be mindful that somebody can't make contact with somebody because they're uncontactable. So are we making sure that good communication systems are in place for staff who want to get some advice?
Very, very good and current question. Mr. Stannard.
Yeah, I'd like to reassure Councillor Andrews that actually it's almost the counter opposite. The almost revolutionary way we've been working since COVID and the use of MS Teams and Skype has facilitated a much more robust way of communicating amongst the workforce, particularly my audit team, much more engaged via from other services. So the fact that we'd have had to troop off to the Bournemouth Learning Centre or some other outlying building, MS Teams has made that so much easier, and it's been almost the counter opposite to what you were saying was in place there, Councillor Andrews.
Do you want to add anything, Councillor Andrews?
Well, no, that's fine. Obviously, sort of underlining the revolution that we're going to be seeing, not only with BCP, but other organisations in terms of permanent offices and meeting rooms.
Councillor Brooke.
Hi, thank you, Chair. Just deal with the camera problem I have with the laptop. There we are. It's picking up on these. I have to say, I've listened to Mr. Stannard's responses to the questions, and I'm quite satisfied that in terms of what he's given, especially to Councillor Mike Cox. But I'm just a little bit concerned with the increase in breaches. That hopefully that will not be a trend that's continued, because at the end of the day, the scrutiny here is also not only looking at the governance elements and the audit aspects, but it's also looking at reputational damage. And really, in terms of what are the risks when we're dealing with these breaches of any reputational damage, and is there anything in place that will limit that?
Councillor Cox, I'm not sure I understand the full question there. Could you maybe elaborate slightly more?
I will try, Mr. Stannard. In terms of we're looking at breach of a process, a financial process, which potentially could, if it were exposed, lead to some sort of reputational damage to the council.
Okay.
So are there any things in place that would enable that risk to be eliminated or mitigated against?
Well, we're obviously in full public session now, and part of good governance is to be open and transparent on all breaches of financial regulations. We shouldn't be sweeping these under the carpet. So, in terms of training and empowering the officers to understand their responsibilities of financial regs, that's an ongoing process, and where breaches are identified in certain teams or certain areas, there's an enhanced training and an enhanced awareness process put in place to ensure it doesn't happen again.
Okay, fine, Chairman. That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stannard. I have no more speakers on this item. The recommendation is for us to note. Are there any members who would not support the recommendation to note? No, there aren't. So, Mr. Hanton, if you could record that we have noted that report, please. And then I come to you again, I'm afraid, Mr. Stannard. This is your penultimate report, internal audit, quarterly audit plan update, and for 2021.
Thank you, Chair. So this report is basically broken up into three key elements. So the first element is I'm asking the committee to agree the internal audit charter. Now, you may recall back in February, you saw an early version of the charter through the audit planning consultation process with the committee. And you did make some comments, and those comments have been incorporated into this revised audit charter. Normally, you would see this in April, but obviously our April meeting was cancelled. The charter is shown in full at Appendix A. Similarly, the internal audit plan, you saw an earlier version of this at your committee in February, and again you would normally approve the plan in April. However, obviously COVID has hit in the interim, and we have had to revise the audit plan. And you will see that there's a table on page 79 which summarises how we've changed the audit plan. And the significant change is the fact that it starts at point 11 in the report, where the internal audit team were completely, that's 12 FTEs, were completely retasked during April and the early part of May to prevent fraud and corruption on the distribution of government business grants. So that took 275 days out of the audit plan, and you'll see that in that table about a third of the way down in the right-hand column. And as a result of that, obviously that has implications on the rest of the plan, and I'm not going to sit here and try and say that it's not a significant impact. That's an eighth of the audit plan taken away, and we've tried our best to mitigate what that might mean to the audit plan. So some, below the line things like non-productive time, we've had a very good sickness rate during the first quarter. So I've been able to pinch a bit more than a proportionate share of that to cover this 275 days that we did in that area, to minimise the impact on the productive areas of the audit plan. So I'll just talk a little bit more now about the work the audit team did do on those government grants. So in total, we reviewed £28 million worth of the grants that were paid out. This is it in paragraph 21 of the report. Approximately 2,600 businesses we reviewed, 28,500, and we estimate that we prevented fraud or error between 1.5 and 2.5 million pounds, and that's about 120 cases out of the 2,600 cases. So some of this was errors where the business had put the wrong bank account. So ultimately they would have, we would have paid sums into the wrong bank account, transposition of digits, things like that. So it's not all fraud. There was some fraud attempted. So it was very worthwhile, and obviously we've prevented a lot of fraud and error and a lot of angst for certain businesses who wouldn't have got their grant in the timescales they did. Elsewhere in the report, Chair, I'm summarising very briefly what audit work we have actually done in the first quarter. And obviously it's relatively small given what we've just talked about in terms of the government grants. But those audits we have done, they are reasonable audit opinion on the Two Rivers Meet Leisure Centre audit we did, and several other audits outlined at paragraph 20 are in train at the moment. I'll leave it there, Chair, and ask for any questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Stannard. Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and first of all, congratulations to Nigel for doing a sterling job on the grant verification. But what I wanted to ask in terms of that is that my understanding is that these grants were fully funded by HM government, and we were just doing effectively a verification check on their behalf. Is there no way we can ask for a contribution towards your sterling work on the basis that we were preventing fraud on behalf of HM to HM government?
Mr. Stannard.
An awkward question, you'll understand. I'm sure the government would argue that part of the 22 million grant that they've given the council is a contribution to those sort of things. We obviously know from the overall numbers that the sums of money that we've been given doesn't match what we've actually incurred. So, it is what it is.
So can I just, it's not a follow-up question, it's another question if you don't mind. I note on the audit activity, it's down by effectively 55 days in total, irrespective of the pluses and minuses. Does that mean you, as a result of staff shortages? And if that is the case, one area that does concern me that seems to have gone down is the audit work on the high-level risks. That's gone down by 65 days. Now I appreciate that you've got to allocate resources as when, but I would have thought that's probably a high priority.
Yeah. What I've done there, Councillor Cox, is I've facilitated a change of work pattern to one of my auditors who wanted to reduce their hours to improve their work-life balance. They may well have left the organisation if I hadn't have agreed that. So on balance, we've agreed a slight reduction. Obviously, there will be an equivalent budgetary saving. I wouldn't have agreed it if I was not confident that within the overall flexibility of the plan, I can still give my overall audit opinion to this committee in a way that's robust and full.
In terms of the high level risks, though, what's the explanation for? You do clearly say there are less resources available, and yet it seems to me to be a it's a fair point, Councillor Cox, but we're in this zone again of we've used 275 days of the audit, and we've got to take it out somewhere. And obviously that's a very significant overall number in the plan, 700 down to 635. You'll note the line above it with the key assurance functions. We haven't taken anything out of that because that's absolute sacrosanct. I can't give you full assurance if we don't do those 200 hours. So I'm very happy if the committee think that we should be
skimming back on, say, key financial systems, this is my judgment. So if you'd like me to go away and have another look at that, I can.
Councillor Cox, I'm inclined to think that Mr. Stannard will have a very firm grip on where he sees his resources going as priorities. I think our experience tells us that he generally has. Are we happy to leave that with him rather than coming back with alternatives?
I'm happy for Nigel to do that, yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Cox.
Thank you. I haven't got any other questions from members. If we go to the recommendations, we have 4 recommendations. Audit and Governance Committee are asked to approve the Internal Audit Charter and agree that the Chair signs the document to record this approval, and to approve the Internal Audit Plan 2021. And then the next section is that Audit and Governance Committee are asked to note the budget for the Internal Audit Service, which has been previously approved by Council, and note progress and issues arising on the delivery of the 2021 Internal Audit Plan. So those are the recommendations. Could I suggest that we just add a line in addition to thank Mr. Stannard and the audit team for their flexibility and increased workload as a result of the work they've done around the government grants, because it has really changed the dynamic of the work that they've been doing in the short term, and I just think that Audit and Governance ought to acknowledge that and to pay tribute to it. So
I'd like to second that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Cox. Quite often the unsung part of the council, because nobody knows unless something goes wrong, and it hasn't gone wrong.
Thank you very much, Chair. I will pass on the committee's comments to my team. Thank you very much.
And thank them on behalf of all of us, Mr. Stannard. Thank you very much indeed. So we've got those recommendations. I haven't seen anything in the sidebar that is contrary to that. So can I take it that all members are supportive of all 4 parts, please? Mr. Hanton, I think you can record that as agreed. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
That takes us on to item 16 on the agenda. We have 2 items coming up involving the external auditors. So the first one is the audit plan for 2019-2020. And we have Paul Dossett with us and Sam Harding. So over to you, Mr. Dossett.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take the audit plan. I think Paul said to me, he sent me an email, said he had been kicked out of the meeting, but he is trying to rejoin. I will take this quite briefly. So this is our external audit plan, which sets out the work that we have been doing and will continue to do to sort of finish and audit the accounts for 1920. Page 3 sets out the sort of significant risk areas. So those are the areas that we'll be focusing a significant proportion of our time and effort. They mainly sort of involve areas where there is estimation and judgment. So we're looking at management override of controls, which again is significant estimates and judgments, as well as sort of journals and where the accounts are open to potential manipulation, but also some of those large items in the accounts, which you'll be used to, those of you who've been on audit committees and legacy councils will be familiar with. So the valuation of land and buildings and the valuation of pension liabilities. For BCP Council this year, we have got 2 more additional risks. One of those is around the transfer of the balances to the new authority from the 3 legacy councils, as well as those assets and liabilities that are transferring across from the former Dorset County Council. And in addition, all of our Grant Thornton audits also have COVID-19 as a significant risk. So that's really around the authority's ability to produce the accounts under the difficult circumstances that we have, as well as our ability to audit them, and the sort of areas that need to be thought around concerning going concern and areas like that. I probably wasn't going to say anything else particularly, but I'm happy to take any questions. Hello?
Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's just a simple question, actually, to do with COVID-19. Are you proposing to put any disclosures into the accounts, and have you notified the officers accordingly?
That probably wouldn't be our decision to put the disclosures in the accounts, because the accounts belong to management. I have seen the accounts very briefly. They landed this afternoon, so we will obviously look at whatever disclosures are in there. I've certainly reviewed the narrative report, and there is a significant amount in that, and I think in the annual governance statement as well. So I suppose the main disclosure areas around things to do with going concern, and also some of the material uncertainties that some of the valuers are reporting in their reports. But obviously I haven't sort of looked at what management have put in at the moment, but it's their call as to what goes in, and we'll just review whether it's appropriate and in line with what we would expect them to do.
Thank you. I believe last year we had quite a problem in terms of valuation of properties. Can you just explain how that's been adjusted for in this year's planning?
Well, obviously valuation of land and buildings is quite a significant risk area. It is particularly complicated at BCP, where you have, I think, 5 different valuers undertaking various valuation work on behalf of the council over the sort of various elements, bringing the legacies together. We have instructed an external valuation expert who've been reviewing the sort of terms of engagement. Some of the issues that we had, particularly around sort of legacy, Bournemouth, HRA, and those valuations will have been addressed by the fact that the valuation will be carried out at the 31st of March 20 rather than at the 1st of April 2019, which will sort out some of those problems. But obviously we will be focusing a lot of our work. We haven't, clearly it's a year-end thing, so we haven't done a lot of interim work on that at the moment, but we will report back any of our findings, and our audit findings report back in November.
Thank you, Ms Harding. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Yeah, just turn on the camera. Yeah, valuations of land and buildings is very, very difficult at the moment. Material uncertainty exists. The professional body, the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, has give warning notices to valuers about properties. In fact, until recently, they were basically recommending you didn't do any valuations. Though they were saying there were 2 or 3 exceptions. For example, let convenience stores. They're probably very secure, people going to convenience stores, and properties let to government departments. But there is the general consensus of view that property values have dropped quite sharply in some spheres. But is that a temporary drop, or is it going to carry on? Obviously, let's see what the valuers come up with, but I do know that there's quite a few qualifications and exclusion clauses that people are putting into reports, basically saying, well, I don't really know, but this is a fairly good guess of what the property is worth now. It's certainly worth less than it was worth 12 months ago. Let's have another go in 12 months' time. Good luck to the valuers. Good luck to them trying to find actually some comparable sales upon which to base their valuation, because they won't find any.
I think certainly for the public sector, some of those valuations are a little bit different, because a lot of your assets are on a depreciated replacement cost, which really relies on the building, how much it will cost to re-provide the service potential of those buildings. So that's depreciated replacement cost, which is based on the BCIS tender values. My understanding is that they hadn't fallen or changed as much as one would have expected. So certainly some of the valuation firms are rowing back on some of the material uncertainties that they had put in. And another sort of large area of the council's asset base is council housing. And I think housing prices have held up fairly well. And obviously there's quite a fair amount of comparable data, because sales are still ongoing, and obviously as we move further away from as things start to get hopefully back to normal, there will be more certainty. But yeah, it's certainly something we'll be keeping under review. We would expect that there will be some disclosure around that uncertainty within the council's accounts, and I think we are still formulating our audit opinions, and they may well refer to any material uncertainties that the council refers to in its accounts. They certainly did in the NHS.
Thank you very much, Ms Harding. That takes us to the recommendation. and I will take it that we agree to note the external audit plan. I haven't seen any comment in the sidebar in dissent in not agreeing. So, Mr. Hanton, you can record that we agree to note. Takes us on to item 17 on the agenda, external audit, progress report and sector update. Again, it's for you, Ms. Harding.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't planning on speaking to this. It's really just to have a look at just the things that are going on within local government as a matter of interest, and just a sort of brief update on our sort of timelines for completing the audit and things like that. So I won't go into it in any great detail. Happy to take any questions.
I haven't.
Just one thing is, obviously I'm aware that companies have been given a 3-month extension to provide their accounts. Has the same allowance been given to local authorities?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, last year the council would have had to have published its draft accounts at the end of May. They've now got till the end of August, although BCP will be, I think it's planning on publishing its accounts tomorrow, and the audit deadline has gone from the 31st of July to the 30th of November, reflecting the amount of time it does take. And just to reflect, we've obviously done the NHS accounts, and they certainly took considerably longer to do remotely.
Thank you very much, Ms. Harding. Nobody else has indicated they wish to speak. The recommendation to this report is to note, and I assume, unless anybody tells me otherwise, that we agree to note. That is agreed for the minutes, Mr. Hanton. Could I say thank you very much indeed to Sam Harding for staying the course this evening. For the 2 items at the back end of the agenda, and give our regards to Paul Dossett when you next touch base with him, because he obviously hasn't managed to get back in. So thank you both very much indeed. Takes us on to item 18 on the agenda, which is the Audit and Governance Committee forward plan. Just by a quick way of introduction, I'm just going to ask Mr. Stannard to say a few words, and then I will add to it in terms of how I see the forward plan evolving. Mr. Stannard.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just turning my camera on. Bear with me. Yeah, thank you. So if we drop straight to Appendix A, just wanted to make you aware of the top 3 reports, which all go hand in hand actually. And they're all a consequence of moving from the current meeting that we're in here. We would normally review all of those reports at the July meeting, but because of the government's change of accounting timetable, they will all now be received at the next full committee in October to follow the statutory deadlines that the government has set. You'll see just from a quick scan of that October column that it's very heavy. So what the chairman's asked me to do is to consider whether any, perhaps 2 or 3 of those ticks in the October column can be moved forward to our September meeting as not to create any precedent, because obviously our September meeting is not a full meeting. It's one of the extra meetings we've put in the calendar, but because of the unprecedented COVID implications on the forward plan, we might sneak a couple of reports into that committee from the October column. I did promise the chairman that I'd try to specifically highlight which reports I would recommend that to be the case with, but best laid plans and all that, there's several reasons why I thought there were some obvious candidates to move forward, and there's good reason not to. So if you could bear with me, Chair, and the committee, and maybe take it offline and see if we can move a couple of reports forward and let the committee know in due course what they are.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stannard. I'm sure we'll be perfectly happy to do that. Could I just fill in a little bit more? So the meeting on the 10th of September, which is one of our special extra meetings, we dealt with a paper on BH Live this evening. There were two other items which members of Audit and Governance had asked to come forward, and they are both there in the meeting for the 10th of September. That's the structure and operation of the Bournemouth Development Company and a review of the organisational and operational structure for the council, which and I'm assuming that the Chief Executive would still be all right for us to do that in September, notwithstanding some of the changes and delays transferred because of COVID. But it does help to add to the agenda. But of course, there is also the other report coming back now on BH Live, and I'm not sure when that is likely to be with us, although I suspect it will be sooner rather than later. And so I think the agenda for the 10th of September remains very, very fluid at the moment, whereas the one for October is obviously far more routine. And if one of those other reports had to be deferred into October, that might unsettle some of the plans that Mr. Stannard and I have been pursuing. We then have a further extra meeting in there for the 3rd of December. And what I was proposing to do was to ask members of the committee, not necessarily immediately by any means, but as time goes by, if you've got any topics that you think Audit and Governance should be looking at from the governance standpoint, then could you just feed those in to me? Always bearing in mind, of course, that to bring an item forward is going to take up resources, officer resources in preparing reports and so forth. So we want to make sure that we're very focused in whatever it is we bring forward. So I just wanted to add those points. I hope that forward plan satisfies members to the extent of how far it's got at the moment. But I think we'll try and be as flexible as we can over what we put into those additional dates. And if you're happy, I will continue to communicate with Mr. Stannard to try and facilitate that, and we'll communicate it to you by email as appropriate. Councillor Brooke.
Fine, thank you, Chair. Sorry about that. Yeah, sorry about the mess as well of cancelling and then asking to speak again. I'm not sure that it's absolutely necessary to move things into these extra meetings. We've had 18 items on tonight's agenda. It's gone down very well. If many of the items are just routine, then surely they can be dealt with relatively quickly. So I personally wouldn't be overly happy at having the extra meetings.
I think if we could also, though, bear in mind that the report on BH Live that will need to come back to us, that we agreed earlier, I don't know whether it will be ready for the 10th of September or whether it might be as late. If it isn't ready, it will have to be the 22nd of October. That will necessarily mean freeing up some space to accommodate it. That's why I'm really asking for a bit of fluidity about this. Not with trying to have extra meetings, but to make sure that we've got enough time to deal with the business thoroughly. Did you want to come back, Councillor Brooks? Are you happy with that?
Yeah, if I may come back. We don't. I mean, you rightly say it's a certain degree of flexibility. We don't know when BH Live will come back. I think in terms of the amount of work and investigation that might be necessary, it's very unlikely that it would be ready in time for September. So I would have thought that we're looking more likely at October or later.
I think I tend to agree with you. Yes, certainly. Councillor White.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Chairman, I beg to disagree with Councillor Mike Brooke. I'm very happy with an extra meeting. I think 3.5 hours this evening is far too long to, give proper consideration to the issues. We have some major things coming down the line, so I'm very happy with an extra meeting in September. Thank you.
Well, members, can we leave it as it is and as explained by Mr. Stannard, and we'll make sure that we communicate back with you. Don't want meetings for the sake of it, don't want to pad things out, but we do need to deal with things in a timely way, and we need to deal with them thoroughly. That is the very least that's expected of us. Councillor Dunlop.
It was just a brief question, Chairman. I noticed in the October meeting we get the Equality and Diversity Annual Report coming through. I'm just wondering when we will see what's likely to be included in that. And the reason I'm asking is that I would be particularly interested to know if there's any areas where we are failing to meet our equality duty. And how those might be addressed and how we would monitor where we were failing. So it's, I guess perhaps it's just something to take away rather than we just having a report saying, oh yes, everything's wonderful with equality and diversity and we have this workforce and that force, this is how we make up this. There's some specific things that I would like to know about where we're absolutely meeting them in terms of those protected characteristics, particularly looking at disability and those sorts of things. And I say that because I know there are a number of areas where the council I think might have some issues in those areas. So I'm looking for us to, I guess, be open and honest about where we might not be meeting them as fully as we should. Thank you.
I think the Leader of the Council could probably answer that. Councillor Slade.
Thank you, Councillor Beesley. I'm grateful for you allowing me to speak. Just to bring you completely up to date, you'll know that I put out expressions of interest for a new Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Working Group, which I've had expressions of interest for, is going to have independent members on it, and we're about to go out to a public advert to try and make that final recruitment. I am conscious that we're due to have our first meeting in September, and whilst I think it will be really useful to have a report in October about where the council is in terms of the annual review, I would be really grateful if you would allow that to be a sort of a snapshot and a baseline assessment rather than an investigation about where we go, and enable the working group to then use that information as it moves forward to perhaps bring you a further review in this after Christmas when it's had a chance to look up where it thinks the main issues are. The priority around the new group is around the BAME issue, but we have made a commitment to include those other protected characteristics and groups as well. So I know it's an annual piece of work, but I don't see the point in duplicating something when a group is about to start and really start delving into some depth.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Slade. You happy with that, Councillor Dunlop?
Yeah, I think it's probably fair to say that the Leader and I are very much on the same page with this, and I really value the effort that she's put in, and actually that sounds a bit patronising, but it's not meant to be. I really value taking it seriously, and I think we're very much on the same page, so thank you for that.
Well, thank you members for that. The recommendation, of course, is to approve the forward plan as set out, but I should add, subject to the amendments and possible amendments that we've spoken about this evening. Could I have agreement on that, because we do need to allow the degree of fluidity that we've talked about. I haven't seen anybody who disagrees with that in the sidebar, so I'll take it that we'll go forward with that, and we'll make sure that all members of A&G are kept closely informed about what it is that's happening to the forward plan. So that brings us to the end of our agenda for this evening. Congratulations to everybody for lasting the course. The Leader of the Council has been there since the beginning and speaks right at the very end. So where did those hours go, I ask? Could I say a special thank you to the Democratic Services team for this evening's meeting. A lot of work went into prep for it, and again, they've stayed the course with the remote meeting, which is not easy. So a thank you big thank you from us to Mr. Jones, to Mrs. Tompkins, and to Mr. Hanton. Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you very much also to the other many officers who have been present this evening and sat through the meeting. It really is appreciated, and I'm sure that we're all on the committee extremely grateful to you all. And so I close the meeting at 9:31. Thank you all very much indeed for attending. Good night.
Thank you, Chairman.